Those who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means, what an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Kunavang, it does. They need me.
We return to End of Dragons Daily. Extremely happy to see again. Yesterday, you guys had loads to say. It's disappointing I won't be able to get all the messages in. And yes, there were a few jokes in there that because the last part got to 25 minutes, they're going to keep expanding. Well, they're not. Damn it. Look at the timestamp right now. Pause if you must. These videos will remain bite-sized. Okay, that is absolutely my pledge to you. Let's continue on. So, yesterday we were talking about mounts a little bit more, and I proposed the idea of this shipping feature. I kind of wanted to talk about this early on in the series because it's not actually something I'm very passionate about or very inspired by, and if I looked at a potential expansion coming out that really was selling that, I'd be very curious why, yet it seemed a lot of people were interested in it. So, let's talk about it. Let's see what some of you guys had to say on the topic, and we'll go from there. First comment here is still on the mount topic, though. It's from Hardy83, who's expressing something a lot of people did, and I really want to cap an extra something onto this observation. So, they say, for mountain gliding, I'd be okay with them taken away at the start of the expansion, or at least the flying ones, until you finish the story. First of all, that's a really interesting idea. You know, I talked about even the Warclaw feeling overpowered, like maybe they disable all of them except the Warclaw, it would still feel OP. It's weird how you have to like create these lines between which mounts are allowed and why. And it sounds simple to just say, well, not the flying ones, but technically there isn't anything that truly flies in Guild Wars 2, and some of even the land-based stuff, if you get in the right conditions, can feel very flying-like. I mean, hell, even the skimmer can if you fly it off of a massive height somehow in some places. And then you've got like lore considerations to think about with where you draw that divide, but in general, I get what you mean, the ones with the really crazy overpowered movement. Other MMOs have tackled this problem before. It's nothing totally crazy for ArenaNet to do as well. Anyway, here's what they say. If they take mounts away under any circumstances, they do not do what Blizzard does and block mounting and flying behind arbitrary grinds like reputation and achievements. It should be easy to attain by everyone. So what I really want to touch on here is that word arbitrary, which people love throwing around when talking about games. I don't think most people know what it means, because very little has ever been arbitrarily added to Guild Wars 2, or hell, any MMO. If we go back to Heart of Thorns, when gliding was implemented, and you had to do stuff before it was fully unlocked and you got onto the ley lines and stuff. When Path of Fire came out, and you had to do stuff before you got the Raptor and then fully trained it up. That wasn't arbitrarily done. It was done because it's as a part of the mastery system, supposed to be a celebration of feeling like you're powering up in a game. People enjoy that sense of having something to work for, especially in MMOs. And I mean, I deride general MMO communities for being too obsessed with the carrot on the stick, but it's true that there's fun and power in that. So that's what ArenaNet's going for. It's fun to upgrade this stuff and work it along. Guild Wars 2 is in this really weird problem, though, as I mentioned in the previous part, where because everything is account bound and everything is done once and then done forever, you're in this weird thing where it starts to feel arbitrary. Looking back, you know, I've had thousands of hours with maximum gliding unlocked, and now it feels arbitrary that I ever had to go collect some mastery points in Heart of Thorns. It feels arbitrary that I ever had to train the Raptor, and especially for a lot of these Path of Fire mount ones, it does start to feel arbitrary. But the truth that it's not, and I think that we're getting this weird place with the community and perceptions about the game because people are forgetting this stuff. You know, looking at Path of Fire, I would actually say there are two expansions there, really. There's the expansion I played right when it came out, and I had a wide feature base to enjoy with all the achievements and new skin unlocks and new stat types and whatever other items, plus, of course, the mount progression. There was that expansion where there was stuff to go for, and then there's another expansion where I'm going to those maps to get elegy mosaics to continue funding ascended gear or future legendaries, or I'm going to do metas just to earn money, or I'm doing it because, you know, there's been something new that cross-pollinates with a new Living World update or something. That expansion, the second of those that I just described, is actually the majority one we experience, and the one that people talk about most. When people call Path of Fire a weak expansion, is because they're thinking about this second scenario. They're not thinking about the first, which was fleeting but actually a lot stronger. And so that's the position Guild Wars 2's in, where I think that a lot of meaningful stuff starts getting called arbitrary. And we're going to have the same thing with End of Dragons. It's actually such a, like, endemic issue to this product, though, that I don't think End of Dragons can necessarily fix it. My advice would be to people, whether they block us off with mounts or not, and no matter how many new masteries they do, whether we're blocked off with mounts until we progress through these gates and stuff, my advice is to just really relish and really take your time and really enjoy the expansion when it first comes out, because it will go away for good. You're going to have to buy a whole new account just to try and replicate what you've once had with this game. It's not true in other franchises. They're happy to let you reset things, but in Guild Wars 2, it has to be done forever, and as Hardy83 says here, for a lot of people, it should be easy to attain on top. I would kind of say pick one personally, but hey. Next, we were talking yesterday about working from home and COVID, whether that will negatively impact the expansion, whether that be in the time it takes to come out, or whether that will be in just the pure quality of it. Well, that's about a lot of discussion. Here's a comment chain starting with Ben, who says, there's a lot of games that have recently been announcing delays, even outside COVID. Crunch is a huge topic for the discussion in the industry. It certainly is, and I actually think for a few years now it has been. We don't really get that discussion much with the Guild Wars, though. I think we should, and we could, particularly with Living World. I think that those teams go through quite a lot fairly regularly. The funny thing is that I think our community is very unsympathetic to any ideas of like Living World crunch that ArenaNet might be going through, because so often the majority of the vocal community is disappointed with the quantity or whatever with those Living World releases. So there's just not that sympathy there, but I think it does happen. John Smith says, ArenaNet seems to at least have been really good at not doing crunch. For better or worse, failings of their projects aren't typically because they're being crunched out, more just bad decisions. They seem to treat their devs pretty well. A whole winter break off, waffle day, or whatever they do. Seems like a fun place of friends. But of course, that's from the outside looking in. I mean, I personally wouldn't really judge that. I wouldn't see just because they have a waffle day or they have a nice kitchen with lots of cereals and stuff like that I really know anything about their workplace culture or what their management's like, or, you know, how much pressure people are under. I think Glassdoor can be revealing of certain things. You know, the idea that was very eye-opening and sad to me that I got from Glassdoor, more than anything else, was the apparent reality that a lot of people look at ArenaNet, and therefore Guild Wars 2 development, as like a stepping stone in their career. It's just, oh, this is a good company to work for on your way up. You know, you don't really have a real deep passion for Guild Wars or this community or these people or the future of this franchise. No. It's just an on the way up kind of thing. And when you start to think of the minds behind the game treating the franchise that way, whether that's by and large or even by and small, it's a very, very depressing thought, really, as kind of a lifer for the game, as I'm sure many of you guys watching this video are. Anyway, I digress a little bit. The idea here that they never have crunch with their side project as well, we don't even know that. You know, just because you don't get a public announcement doesn't mean they didn't have some kind of internal date that they were really, really going for. In fact, you know, right before the big layoffs and stuff, I wouldn't be surprised, and this is pure speculation, but I wouldn't be surprised if they had some like really serious red line for a big ass project, and they were crunching away on it, and then, you know, missed it at the end of the day afterwards, and then everything kind of came crashing down. I bet there's still a ton of work and a ton of pressure that comes in ebbs and flows. But yeah, who are we to say? Vincent Mayers says, not just crunch, many businesses struggle to explain their employees why they have to come to the office during times like these. Even though it may be essential or important to a business, it takes an extra toll on staff. And in this kind of industry, I'm sure people cannot do everything from home. Responding to WP's question, working from home does impact productivity negatively for some, positively for others, and again, not at all for others. Sometimes home office may involve social isolation, with the consequences of that of the home workspace may simply be insufficient efficient. Think of people who rent a cheap studio, for example. And finally, for sure, ArenaNet even did a few streams from home. You can see that one of the devs dismantled his entertainment area for his work desk. His bed was behind him and a few feet from the kitchen. You've got people on their own struggling. It's also hard to tell when people are struggling and not reaching out. You're not there to see the body language. You've got people on the opposite end too, those with families who are all working under the same roof and kids to look after. So yeah, I'm sure it will affect things. I know that some people do thrive under a little bit of change, and some people thrive when they're not under constant scrutiny of their peers or whatever, and they can take things at their own pace. You know, we're living in a world where a lot of people are seriously talking about the 4-day work week, right? Which on the face of it seems to be getting less out of your employees, but because people are happier and more motivated on the days that they're working, they're just as productive. And again, that's like a thing of deadlines as well. You've got a certain amount of work to do for the week. People get it done in 4 days, or they'll stretch it out to 5. It's kind of your choice. In any case, the one final thing I'd like to say on this as well that I've been curious about is not necessarily like grunt work. It's not just effort to go through. It's that collaborative side of development. It's that back and forth. It's that exchange of ideas and having people easily on tap to sort of refer to. Now, I know that obviously there's lots of ways to do that through the internet and your PC as well, and you should, in theory, have people on hand. Maybe being in an office doesn't offer as much as I'd think, but that's the kind of stuff that I would be more questioning of. I don't know whether working from home is really going to impact the amount of workload people can get through, but will it maybe affect the kind of decisions, you know, when you can't have as regular or as productive meetings as you regularly would? Does that mean that the ideas that are being ran with or are being pitched or not being pitched are of a lower quality? That's what I would think. And I don't know, if we see stuff is weird and wonky with End of Dragons, dare we blame COVID? I wonder what you guys think on that. Over to the boats. Sean says, I think marketing the expansion on owning a boat sounds a lot worse than a new race as its big new feature. They could certainly make it a cool feature, almost a combination of player housing plus a PvP activity. It could even tie in with fishing, but it's harder to put that on an ad than new mounts or race, regardless of whether it's a better feature. So yeah, I think you've touched on something really powerful there, and that's the marketability of the idea. And at the end of the day, you know, I could put my personal feelings about a ship feature aside. I think it's the marketability of the thing that is most important. If they disregarded stuff like that, you know, we would have seen revamps to Corteria and better tutorialization, and all that stuff, all that serious core stuff would have been fixed up by now. The reason it hasn't been is because it's not so marketable, particularly to vets, I think, and maybe new players alike as well. I mean, that's a slightly different discussion. You've mentioned something else here as well, and that's the idea of some kind of PvP thing. Now, I noticed a ton of you guys were talking about that as we went along. It seems almost nobody was really envisioning this as a feature that was just PvE. Now, remember, we are in Guild Wars 2, and in general, you know, adventures aside, and very weird specific little things, some of the Icebreed Saga meta events, for example, they don't really involve the idea of PvP in any kind of, you know, we don't even have a basic dueling feature. So if you were really going to have that, I don't think you would see that off the shores of Cantha or whatever. I think if they were going to be true to Guild Wars 2's real principle and design, what that would mean is world versus world would get ship combat somehow. And that's funny to think of because, you know, most of the water in world versus world has been very deliberately removed. This kind of sidles us into another discussion, which is, will the new expansion have another new Borderlands? And I love that discussion. I love that idea. What we would be proposing here then is some kind of an ocean Borderlands, right, with small sporadic islands around, but then you'd be able to participate in ship combat or something as you went along, and that would be like the flavor of that Borderlands. Interesting idea, but that's really where that would be, I think. I can't imagine that anywhere else. Maybe there would be ship combat, just not PvP combat. I can see this, especially, again, look at Season 4, the end of the Istan meta. Look at what they did in the Sandswept Isles with that little raft thing looking around. It really feels like they were looking at a lot of engine tech and ideas for having moving ships with collision and cannons on them that you could break properly, and it doesn't seem too far away. So I like all of those ideas, but to go to the very spirit of this question, is that better sounding or even more healthy for the game than like a new race or something? My answer to that is no. I agree with this commenter. I think that the new race is the better idea. Now, to be fair, a shipping feature could be obscenely healthy for the game if the rewards and the excitement and all that kind of stuff is worked out perfectly with it, so it generates this like crazy player retention. You know, that's true as well, but that could be true of any number of prospective expansion features, not just sailing around on ships. I mean, you mentioned fishing there as well. That's another great idea for a landmark feature, I think. That alone could do it, and you don't need to be on a boat to go fishing. Zigzagging back to the release date comment real quick, Juno says, I don't mind waiting for release, I just can't stand this information drought we are going through. We want XPAC details. Why do you think ArenaNet has been keeping quiet about End of Dragons content? So I love this question, I really do. I also hate this question from the bottom of my heart, but I'm really happy it's been sort of pushed out there because I think there's a very simple answer to this and it has to be talked about. You're asking the wrong thing. You're asking me why are they keeping quiet about End of Dragons content? It's not that at all. The answer is simply that they're not ready to talk about the End of Dragons stuff. Whatever they've got in development right now is too primitive, is too likely to change, is too whatever. And talking about stuff is not the same as talking about stuff in a highly marketed way that generates hype that is being specifically calibrated at the right time to generate sales. You have to be careful and not just candid about how you talk about upcoming stuff. So that's the reason why they're not talking about it, but I actually take issue with this question in the first place, because I think your perspective is totally off. Rewind the clock at what, 10 months ago? I did a video talking about the state of Guild Wars 2 and the state of the game, the community. And I said was one of the biggest issues that the game was facing at the moment was that it felt like it had no future or direction. ArenaNet at that time had not communicated anything about an End of Dragons. We had the Icebrood Saga, which was kind of already limping along to a certain extent. A lot of people were convinced that there was never going to be another expansion, and that sense that there was no future for this game, I said, was doing big damage. Now, a few months later, ArenaNet revealed, look, we do have an expansion in the works, and that immediately fixes that problem. People still have hope. They still feel like it matters that they're building wealth or legendaries or whatever, because it feels like there's something that's going to be happening. I think getting that information that an expansion will happen out was crucial, but that doesn't mean they actually have to give us details yet. See, I think the only reason really that you know about End of Dragons right now is to preserve the game and the community in the meantime. What I mean to say is they're not withholding information for you and being unnecessarily quiet. What they've done is offered you extra information and being extra verbose, like a year in advance about an expansion, just so that you're in the know. That has been an additional little privilege you've been given, and now you kind of got to sit down and shut up and wait until they're ready to actually talk about it. Look at the way that they promoted Path of Fire. You hardly knew a thing until right towards the end. I actually think they did way too small of a window there. Even Heart of Thorns, there was not an announcement that far out. So yeah, I don't think this is a case of them being weirdly quiet or an information drought or whatever. What you should be focused on are there other initiatives like balance initiatives, the Icebrood Saga stuff, whatever changes they're putting in for World vs. World and PvP, mini-seasons, stuff like that. If none of that interests you, cool, and that's fine. I won't stand against that, and I think a lot of people are in that position. But I don't think from their perspective that magics up some reason for them to keep giving you more End of Dragons stuff. I mean, I'm happy we got a trailer just a few months ago. Closer to the release, I'm sure they'll talk. Next, we got a message from Mark Anthobor, who's just got a great point. I hadn't thought at all of this. And I probably should have. The way I see it, they might offer mount rentals in the area for new players, similarly to how they do so for roller beetle races and festivals. I do think that the Cantha maps will be designed for mount use too, ultimately. So this is kind of like a big right hook to my entire discussion before. What I was trying to do in that previous part was give another reason for why maybe mounts shouldn't be available at the start of the expansion, and I provided like this alternate argument about having parity between new players and veterans. And well, with this comment you realize they could just put mount rentals around. They could design the whole expansion to be traversed with those mounts and expect people to have those mounts, and then just put rentals around, and that's it. There's no problem there, aside from the fact that they've got these massive maps that players can be traveling really quick, and the sense of exploration is fundamentally different post Path of Fire than pre Path of Fire. But you may say, well, look, we've made that cake and now we're eating it, so there you have it. It's a good point, and I'm really glad you made it. Also, thinking about roller beetles, and yesterday we talked about the idea of alternate ways of getting the same mount, like unlocking a Canthan Raptor or whatever. I think that the one place where we might really see that is with the roller beetle, because maybe not everyone was going to be wanting to play that one season 4 episode during the End of Dragons era. Maybe they'll do another way of acquiring one so that you can use this ultimately Canthan thing in these Canthan races as they reopen in the new continent. That would be cool, right? 2 more comments here. 1 for shipping, 1 against. James Lee says, a hard no to me from sailing. I love it in the few games I do it in, but Guild Wars 2 could not possibly do it justice because maps in this game live under the tyranny of the rectangle. On land, that is manifested in massive rectangular mountains. At sea, we'd constantly run into the silly strong current warning at map edges. It would totally destroy the vastness of the sea generally required to make sailing feel like sailing, unless they radically change how we can move between maps. I really don't see sailing being anything meaningful in this game. Brilliant point, and I've seen a lot of people talking about End of Dragons saying just make the maps massive, just make the maps really big. Remember, they did that with Path of Fire, and they specifically said with Path of Fire that those POF maps are as big as the engine can possibly handle. Remember how much bigger those POF maps are than all the vanilla ones like Queensdale and stuff? They're huge, and they would have been bigger, except they literally couldn't do it. I think their original idea was the Desert Highlands and the Crystal Oasis were all one map originally for Path of Fire, but it was too big, so they kind of ended up having to split it. I can imagine maybe all of that is just water, but still, you've got this issue of what do they do at the borders. It's a great point. Here, Smash Steed says, I think that sailing is a great idea if they go all in on it. Have everywhere you'd currently be pushed back by current zones become transitions to new maps that you play your ship on. Have the interior of the ship be basically player housing. Have ship-to-ship combat system that was at least close to the depth of the normal combat system. Ship classes, things like that. Well, listen, I don't think they're going to get ship combat close to the depth of the regular combat because that's had a decade of work put into it in terms of depth and variance and stuff like that. But you could get something good. I mean, if your expectations are that high, I would be worried about it. Guild Wars 2 has phenomenal combat, almost like they caught lightning in a bottle. And to think they could do it again with some kind of ship v ship system, I'd be cautious of. I like this idea of maybe just having a lot of maps and that's how you get around the rectangle, but it is weird to me. I think a lot of people are excited about this as well. You know, one of the games I was playing this year, I haven't really talked about on YouTube much, is Sea of Thieves. And I love the way that they did a lot of the stuff in Sea of Thieves, but a lot of the things that game did so well about boating and being on the ocean, all that stuff, is stuff that Guild Wars 2 could never do. Because what Sea of Thieves was good at doing was taking UI elements away and taking quality of life away and making you do things manually and kind of breeding this extremely immersive system out of it. Meanwhile, Guild Wars 2 goes in the opposite direction with all of that stuff, and I just don't see how the ships would work. You did tap on one thing, though, which I'd like to be our next topic. That's the idea of player housing, which I have a ton of thoughts on. So thanks, guys. Please drop any messages, response to comments right now. Use the thumbs up, really, because then I can figure out what comments you guys want responses to more than anything else with this tight time frame we have each day. I'm desperately looking at the timer for the video right now. And yeah, the next topic we'll do player housing, which I actually, funnily enough, for years I was not inspired about, but now I kind of am. Thanks to a stint in Fallout 76, believe it or not. So anyway, we'll get to that next time. Thanks, guys. You've really, really shown me that you're supporting this series and this idea, and it really made me feel very, very good. I've not been in a good place over Christmas, and it feels good. So thanks, everyone, and I'll love to see you on the next one. Tell other people about it. Let's grow the series. See you there.